Hello. Now, finally, we can start doing the texturing. In this tutorial, we're going to take a look at layers, masks, and blending. And we're going to mostly be dealing with the base color, the roughness, and metallic channels. And we're going to layer on top three of these layers: the bare metal surface, the paint layer, and the dirt on top. And in order to control how these things interact with each other, we're going to have to use masks and blending modes. So we're going to take a look at those. Later on, we're going to take a look at, in another tutorial, height maps and normal maps, but for this tutorial, this is more than enough. So I have created a basic setup here, and I'm going to delete everything and start from scratch. And we are back to the beginning. We have only our object and its baked mesh maps here. As you can see, world space normals. We didn't create the material ID because we don't need it. Ambient occlusion, curvature, position, and thickness. And that's it. Nothing else. So, before we begin, it is good to remember what we're trying to create after all. So this is the manufacturing of a shipping container. As you can see, it starts off as a bare metal surface that they weld on, then they grind those welds flat and do various manufacturing operations, but then they start laying on paint, and it goes into a painting chamber and it's sprayed with this industrial grade protective finish, this protective paint layer. And what we are trying to imitate here is that throughout the usage of this, throughout the lifespan of this shipping container, it is going to inevitably receive some damage. It is going to be hitting various surfaces and, you know, receive the kinds of damage that car paint damage, for example. Let's assume things like these will start to happen. The paint will chip away, never mind the geometrical damage here, but the paint will chip away and reveal the bare metal underneath. So this is what we're trying to imitate on an industrial scale. Okay? So let's get into Substance 3D Painter and start with our first layer. Right now my layer stack is empty, so I'm going to click here, which is add fill layer, and I'm going to add a fill layer. Now, all layers, including masks in Substance 3D Painter, come with these settings. So since we have selected PBR Roughness Metallic as our project, as you can remember from here in the project configuration, I mean, it doesn't allow us to change it right now because you have to set it up from scratch, but we have selected PBR Roughness Metallic. So PBR Roughness Metallic automatically comes with a color channel, a height channel, a roughness channel, a metallicness channel, and a normal map channel. So all layers, whether they are created as masks, fill layers, paint layers, effects layers, generator layers, whatever you want to use, they all come with these different channels, activatable, is that the word? Yeah, activatable or deactivatable. So you can, for example, right now all of these things are active, so you can select which ones you want to use or not use. Since this is our first layer, it is going to be the base layer, it is going to be the bottommost layer. I'm going to activate all of them. We are not going to deal with height and normal, so we're not going to touch those settings. We're going to deal with them later. But in these settings, I have to set up first a base color, a uniform base color, and I want to go with a darkish gray, like closer to middle tones perhaps, steel color. Okay, so this is going to be steel underneath. And to set up the roughness, since this layer will be revealed when the surface is scratched, that scratching effect will obviously clean up the surface of any oxidization and reveal the shiny nature of the metal underneath. So I'm going to give it a good low roughness to imitate that shininess. And since this is a fully metallic material, a fully metallic substance, I'm going to crank this up all the way to 1. So this is our metallic layer. Now it doesn't look anything like this or before it was painted, but if you look at the corners, these grind away areas, so this thing is welded, and after the welding operation is complete, they grind those welds to lower any type of protrusion, reduce any type of protrusion on the surface, and through that grinding operation the layer of oxidation is scratched away and this shiny metal is revealed from underneath. But in reality this obviously has a layer of oxidation on top of it, and that causes a significant amount of roughness on the surface. But once you scratch away that very thin layer of oxidation, this shiny metal is revealed. And the same thing will happen if the paint is scratched as well. With the car paint, with scratching the paint of this, any metallic surface with a paint on it, if you scratch away the paint, you will inadvertently scratch away some of the metal as well and will reveal that shiny nature of the metal lying underneath. So that's what we are trying to imitate. Okay, so a very glossy surface. This is not fully glossy. Remember, this is not a mirror, but it is somewhat glossy. Like 0.15 I think is good. 0.12, 0.15 is good. And it's fully metallic with a middle tone to darkish gray. Okay? So that's it. This is the beginning point. Now we have to put on top the paint layer. So I'm going to add in another paint layer, another fill layer, and it will immediately cover literally everything. It will immediately cover every surface on top. So I'm going to give this a good color that we can understand. So I'm going to give it a, I don't know, a burgundy color of some sort. I think this is good. And since this paint is dielectric in nature, I mean, it is probably epoxy paint, it's an epoxy based paint, it is plasticky in nature, it will be non-metallic, so metallicness is 0, but it will also be somewhat glossy. I'm going to go with 0.2. And right now both of these layers are completely uniform in nature, meaning that no pixel in this system has a different value than another one. Literally all pixels of this layer are this gray, all pixels of this layer are at this height, all pixels of this layer are at this roughness, are at this metallicness with these normals. Same goes for the layer on top. Okay? Any type of variations in the surface will be created through masks. And for creating masks, we have to first understand what masks do. So in order to create a mask, you can just right click on a layer and, for example, add a white mask. Now a white mask will not do anything because in the language of masks, a white color means that everything that this mask is attached to is fully opaque. A white color means opaque. So this layer on top with the white attached is fully opaque. If this is, for example, painted with a black color, then the layer underneath will be revealed, because black in masks terms, in a mask's term, is fully transparent. So I'm going to grab a brush layer, and my brush settings are here, or alternatively I can right click on a window, on a viewport, and access the brush settings. So I'm going to give it a substantial amount of thickness. Also I'm going to go into its alpha. This is the brush shape. The brush will be in this shape, so I'm going to increase its hardness. Okay, now you can see the difference, and I'm going to go over here, and remember I have to select my color. I am painting in grayscale with uniform color, and it is this setting that allows me to change the color. So I'm going to set it to full black, and I'm going to paint it over here. Remember, my mask is selected. I'm not selecting this. My mask is selected, and I'm painting the mask. Okay. So now, since the mask on top has a black area here, it reads this value as fully transparent or 0% opacity, and reveals the layer underneath by occluding this layer on top. So let me demonstrate the same thing in Photoshop terms, because Photoshop is a better way of understanding how these layer stacks work. So I'm going to paint something over here. Okay, let's make it blue, for example. Okay, let's grab a brush and grab a fairly standard general brush, a hard round brush. Okay, so this is one layer, and I'm going to create another layer on top, and in that layer I'm going to paint a different color. Let's pick a color like this. Okay, so when that layer is on top, I can fully occlude the one underneath. I can fully block the view of the other one, obviously. But if I add a layer mask on top of it, now this layer mask is, as you can see, fully white, meaning that nothing is being erased here, nothing is being non-displayed here. Okay, but if I grab a black color, select the mask, and paint on it, as you can see, I am revealing the layer on top. I am not deleting the layer. That's the important bit. So this is how we are going to utilize masks in Substance 3D Painter to selectively reveal the layers underneath other layers. Okay, so obviously I don't want to paint in all of my details. I want to do this procedurally and as quickly as possible, because time's ticking. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm not going to bother in with this. I'm going to just remove the mask and add a new white mask. Now, how can we selectively modify this layer to reveal the one underneath? Well, it is easy. I'm going to go in and add a generator. I'm going to select this mask first, not this one, because I can add a generator to this as well. I want to select the mask first, add a generator. Now, this is an empty generator. We don't know what it is yet, so we have to go over here and select the generator. Now, Substance 3D Painter is pretty clever in this regard, because it is going to automatically minimize our search results to objects that are applicable in this port, in this input. So generators, all kinds of generators. So I'm going to select the mask editor. Now the mask editor will automatically do something, but before that happens, I'm going to just zero out everything, literally everything. So right now the mask is fully occluding because it is black. If I invert it from the top, it is going to turn into white again. So right now I am fully showing this layer, and I'm going to double click these layers and just name them so we can understand what's going on. So this is base metal and this is the paint. Okay, and right now I am back to where I started. My mask editor is just pushing out a white color. So a mask, just because none of its settings are working right now, doesn't mean that it is empty. It is not empty. It is just pure white. So whatever paint I put on here is going to interact with this mask. So for example, let me go into paint and repaint something. Okay. If I shut down that mask, it is going to reveal that there's a painting underneath. So mask is taking the place of the painting of this mask layer or this mask attachment in general. So if I want this thing to work in tandem with the paint, I will have to change its blending mode. So for example, if I say overlay, it is going to overlay this mask, doing some mathematical calculations on top of this already painted area. So we're going to take a look at blending modes in a few moments, but let me first get rid of this paint underneath. Okay, so let me shut this off really quickly, switch back to this, paint in this area with white color, fully white color again, make sure that I haven't missed anything. Okay, everything seems to be in order, that's good. So let's turn the mask back on. It doesn't do anything because it is pushing the same pure white color as the paint layer, okay, as the original mask of the paint layer. So let's go into the mask editor. As you can see, there are many settings here, and these settings are attached to our baked mesh maps. So I have explained these mesh maps and what they do originally. So I'm not going to go over them one by one. Just know that when we bake our mesh maps, they will be automatically attached to this object, and anything that has to use those mesh maps to make any sense will automatically inherit those masks from the list, from our project list. Okay, so our world space normals, position gradient, thickness, curvature, and ambient occlusion is all ready to go right here. So what you can do here is play around with how these mesh maps could interact with the mask in general. So first of all, what do I want to do? I want to scratch off these edges. So what is the one mesh map that is capable of isolating those edges? So if we look at the curvature map once more, as you can see, the sole purpose of the curvature map is to recognize where the surface changes directions, whether creating an outside edge like these painted in white, or an inside edge painted in black. So every 90-degree inside corner is painted pure black, and every 90-degree outside corner is painted white, and values in between are painted in tones of gray. Okay, so this is not pure black because this edge right here is not pure 90 degrees. It's not fully 90 degrees. So you get the idea. So I'm going to go back to my material. Okay, so if I play around with the curvature, for example, let's start with changing its opacity. It is going to start doing something. It is right now occluding this paint layer, creating a mask to occlude this paint layer. And if you alt click on the mask, alt left click on the mask, you're going to see the mask. So it is doing this. Okay, let me alt click on this to switch back to material. Let's go back to our paint and mask editor again. Okay, so as you can see, the curvature is doing something, but it is not exactly doing what we want. We want to isolate these edges. So under the curvature settings, you will see that there are many settings for how large this curvature map will be taken into account. So I don't want huge areas, huge shifts in curvature. I don't want big shifts in curvature. I don't want large shifts in curvature, nor medium ones. I mean, I can zero these things out, maybe leaving just a smidge. Okay, soft I don't want, fine I want some, and sharp can stay full, or I can also decrease that by some amount. Now you can see the effects of the mask here. I will decrease these even further to minimize bleeding. Okay, so right now, as you can see, the mask is isolating that paint layer on top around the edges, and it is selecting those edges. If I want, I can select the cavities, meaning these are outside edges, these are inside edges. We call them edges and cavities, or you can call them convex edges and concave edges, or you can select both. Okay, or you can apply this to everything, everything that is related to this curvature map without any selection. Okay, so if you select dual, as you can see, we are starting to isolate the inside edges as well. So if you go to cavities, for example, only the inside edges are selected right now. So dual selects them both, and edges. Okay. So right now the blending mode is linear dodge, otherwise known as additive, add mode. Okay, so if I switch this to normal, nothing is going to change. Why is nothing changing? Because we have nothing else here. We are not blending with other modes of this generator. This generator has drop-down menus, and each drop-down menu comes with its own blending mode. But right now there is nothing else to blend, so picking this as normal will not do anything. But subtract, for example, is going to break this. Why? Because we are subtracting from nothing. If you subtract from nothing, you get nothing. Okay? There is no minus value in this mask. This mask, think in binary terms. It goes from 0, black, to 1. So if I subtract from 0, nothing is going to happen. Because no matter how large these values are, it is not going to work. But right now I am subtracting a white value from another white value. If I invert this and subtract, it should work. Or maybe it doesn't, because it is clever that way. Never mind that. Okay, so in any case, you could try other blending modes like multiply. There's nothing to multiply with. It is 0. Add sub, it is only going to add. It is not going to also subtract. So overlay, it is going to overlay on top, but there's nothing to overlay on. You get the idea. And now, once you start getting the hang of these things, hang of these blend modes, you will start instinctively picking what works in certain circumstances, and there are many more blending modes, as you can see here. These are all the list here only applies to these kinds of drop-down menus, but for the layer menus there are many things, many types of blending modes. You don't have to know every single one of them. You don't have to know what they do, but there are pretty good guidelines out there that will show you the basics of what these things are capable of. So I'm going to go back to linear dodge for good measure. Okay? Now, what can we add on top of this? What are we trying to do here? First of all, let's play around with contrast a little bit. So if you play around with the contrast, you will see that that transition goes from soft to sharp, and that is very meaningful because when you scratch a surface, you're not going to scratch some of the paint. You're either going to scratch none of the paint, or you're going to scratch all of the paint that in the area that is being scratched. So a high contrast in this case is pretty meaningful. You can also play around with the brightness, and that brightness will change the value to include all areas or none of the areas. Okay, so as you can see the effects, maybe we should leave it at 0 because we want to keep a high contrast between the scratched off areas and the non-scratched areas. Okay, so this is good, but right now, as you can see, we are scratching literally every edge. Everything that is an outside edge is receiving the same treatment, which isn't something we want, because this doesn't look random. We want this to look as random as possible to tell a story, because if we are, I mean, maybe for some reason in the future, for some work or in your work right now, you might be you might want to use the curvature channel for doing this kind of work for some reason, but in our case, for scratching the paint, this doesn't seem to make any sense, because literally every outside edge is scratched, and they are scratched in the same amount. So we want to play around with this. How can we play around with this? Well, we can lay a texture on top and have it interact with the curvature. So as you can see, you have two dedicated texture channels. Right now, both of them are empty. So if I go to texture, it is right now set to uniform color, which is black, and it's not going to do anything because it is a pure uniform color. We want it to contain some type of pixel data. So if you go to texture, it is going to go into the textures, procedural textures, and under the drop down menu of procedural textures you can select whatever you want. Alternatively, a much easier option to go over here. Okay, so under here in this assets menu, which is very useful, you can isolate all of these available assets, and there are many of them, so it is a good common sense to isolate these textures. So let's go to textures. Okay, and I'm going to give you a small advice. Just search for example, grunge, or let's take a brief look first. So as you can see, there are many layers here, many types of textures here, and some of them includes randomness, meaning that you can change the values that are included in these things. These are dynamic textures. They are not just simple texture maps. I mean, you can call in your own texture maps and use them if you want, but take a look at this list and see what grabs your attention. For example, maybe we should find something that will isolate, break away this very uniform edge treatment that we have given this object. So let's go with concrete dust, for instance, and I'm going to grab this and I'm going to put it over the texture. And I have to go to the texture channel first. Mask editor, image inputs, yeah, texture. Let's go over here and put it here. Okay, so this is a concrete texture, but we can utilize it. I mean, we are not trying to create a concrete here, but we are trying to utilize the black and white values of this additional texture to isolate and interact with this edge treatment. Okay, so if you go to texture, I'm going to right now make a note of this value, like 0.7. Let's say that this is 0.7. Okay, curvature opacity, that's good. Let's check the mask, it looks good. Okay, I'm going to drop this down, drop this value down, and then go to texture and increase it all the way to 1. Now it is in overlay mode, so I'm going to put it to normal, and this is what it does. Basically uses this texture in order to use it as a mask. Like, it applies this black and white values to the mask, and it does that by overlaying that texture on this area over here, and you can play around with the parameters from here. So right now it is tiling once, meaning that this entire texture is just tiling once in this entire area. But if you increase, for example, the tiling amount, let's say 4, it is going to start tiling across, and you're going to start you will start seeing these types of texture repetitions, which is not something you want. So most of the time, unless you are interacting or causing a reaction between two textures that are tiled different amounts, you shouldn't play with the tiling amount. Once is more than good enough, especially considering the fact that we're going to utilize this texture to block the other one anyway. So you can also start playing around with its effects. So let me go to mask menu, okay, by alt clicking this mask, the mask view, sorry. You can play around with its balance, and that balance will change the contrast. But we also have a contrast button here that will further accentuate that contrast. I mean, balance is all about changing the procedural nature, the blending of white and black values, and contrast is about actually treating those values as colors and not dynamic values that you can change. So if I increase the balance, I'm going to start getting this nice looking let's say patches, and these patches then can be utilized to interact further with the edge blending or edge treatment. Okay, so it is a very high contrast map right now. This is good. Now I'm going to go into here, okay, and start introducing the curvature, okay, back to 0.7. Now nothing is happening. Why? Because this thing is on top and its mode is set to blend. So what if I set it to add? It is going to add it on top of the bottom channel, the bottom treatment, which is curvature. But maybe if we try subtract, it is going to do this. Now this mask is black around the edges, white all around, which is something we want. So let's go over here and once again let's go back to our mask editor and crank the curvature opacity all the way to 1. Sorry, this is curvature opacity. I want to increase this opacity as much as possible. And now I am breaking away that surface effect by utilizing another texture. So since this is very hard to read when it starts to tile, maybe I'm going to increase this tiling amount to see what happens, to create even further patches. Not bad, not bad. And start playing around with the balance as well. So this is all trial and error. Okay, I'm quite happy with the results. Maybe increase the contrast a bit and further reduce balance. Okay, not bad. So we have scratched the edges, but what happens when we start to introduce yet another texture? So I'm going to find a real scratchy texture. So let me see. We can search for it. Okay, so we have directional scratches, grunge, dirt, scratch, grunge, dirt, scratchy, grunge, dusty, scratch, grunge, scratch, general, grunge, scratches, whatever this is. I like this one. So let me go over here and save my file, obviously. And I'm going to select the texture secondary and apply it here. Now, obviously, once again, nothing is being done here right now. I mean, not in here, but in here, opacity is 0. So I'm going to increase it. And once again, nothing is happening because if I go to texture 2, it's set to overlay. If you set it to normal, you can start seeing its effects, but maybe we should add it to linear dodge. Okay, much better. And the scratches in question are huge, so I don't want these types of huge scratches. So what I'm going to do is increase the tiling amount to something like 4. Not this one. Or we can, since this is a dynamic texture, I don't have any option to tile it, but I have so many options to change the scratches. So I can play around with these values. So what I can do here is once again isolate this mask by alt-clicking on it so I can better see what is going on. So let's go with scratch width, lower the scratch width. Scratch length, those are too long. I'm going to decrease them. I'm going to just give it some blur to ease them in. Increase the balance a bit. Increase the contrast a bit. Increase double scratches. Scratch dirtiness. There's also dust here, as you can see. I'm going to decrease the dust intensity because I'm not trying to introduce dust over here. I'm just trying to introduce scratches. So dust and dirt is something we're going to add later, so I don't want dust. So scratch spots, increase the tiling. Not bad, not bad. Maybe while we're here we can play around with this setting too. Okay. Not bad. So let's go over to material and see its effects. Not bad, right? Good. Now what else can I do? Maybe we could take a look at the ambient occlusion. We can introduce ambient occlusion to some areas and maybe isolate it. Let's try. So I'm going to crank the ambient occlusion all the way to 1. It is right now set to multiply. I'm going to set it to linear dodge. So linear dodge is going to cause havoc, as you can see. So maybe if I play around with the balance a bit, maybe it is going to work. Let's start with, let's start with inverting this map, because ambient occlusion, as you remember, is darker tones overlaid on top of almost a pure white map. So when I start using it as in add mode, it is going to first of all break away all the edge treatment I have provided using curvature, because it is sitting on top of the curvature, right? It is going to get rid of that curvature areas because all of that white that is coming from the ambient occlusion is situated above the curvature. So add mode adds that white on top of the edges and gets rid of the black. So we don't want that. We want to invert it, so it is a black on top, it's a white spots, it is white shadows on top of black light right now. Okay, so, and I'm going to play around with the balance to further point out areas that this thing is going to be situated in. Remember, this area in the ambient occlusion map is darker. So are these areas. So I want to create sort of scratchy areas there. Maybe that doesn't make sense, but in some context, those are also the areas that would gather rust, because that is where the water would accumulate. That is where this surface would start to rust, and if the paint chips away, then the bare metal will be revealed from underneath, and we can further add rust to the bare metal, to base metal, or between the paint and the base metal, to also create rusty areas. So we can do that. So right now I'm looking at ambient occlusion. Let me go back to material and then turn on this again. Okay, so what I want to do here is create a huge contrast. Create a blur. And isolate those areas as much as possible without losing those details. I mean, this is good. Maybe decrease the balance a bit. Okay, not bad. Okay, I kind of like this. Yeah, this kind of starts to make sense. So this is how you can also utilize ambient occlusion. We're going to use ambient occlusion for adding a dirt layer as well. So when I look at this, I'm really happy with the results. This is starting to make sense. But remember, we were only dealing with how this layer on top with uniform values is revealed to the layer on the bottom with uniform values. We didn't introduce any type of heterogeneous properties to these layers yet. I mean, the masks are quite nice, but there is no surface changes to this. If you look at the paint layer, anytime we see the paint layer, it is the same old boring color with the same old boring roughness values. And anytime we see the metal underneath, it is the same old metal with the same old boring, again, color and roughness values. So we can start to introduce some type of spontaneity or maybe heterogeneity to these layers as well. So as you can see, I'm dealing with the base color, but I can also go to roughness, metallic, and normal at any moment. And in terms of the mask editor's performance or practice, it's not going to change anything. Like this mask is right now working on, since this mask is here, this fill layer is here attached to this with color, height, roughness, metallic, and normalness. It is right now controlling everything. That mask is controlling everything from metallicness to roughness to height map to normal, everything. But if I go over here and plug something into the roughness, then I can start playing with the idea of introducing non-uniform substances or surface properties. So if I go to roughness, for example, I can start plugging in procedural textures. For example, let's go back to the textures, and under the textures find something that would be suitable for representing the roughness variations on a painted object. Okay, so not every paint will be these types of industrial paints will not be the same across the board. Okay, so maybe something that will introduce some form of roughness variation. So what can we do here? I want something that is grayish. So fractal sum base seems like a winner. Let's look at other things. So grunge scratches, that is also fine. So let me plug this into the roughness channel. Okay, immediately we see an effect. Okay, but let's go back to the roughness, and remember we wanted the roughness to be almost black but not fully black. Okay, so if I play around with the balance, so let me invert this. Okay, see, this makes more sense. When roughness is closer to black, it is the surface is glossier. Okay, so they have an inverse correlation. The shininess of the surface is an inverse correlation with the roughness of the surface, obviously. So that's what we are trying to achieve here, and we don't want to modify what these edges do in general. Okay, so let me check this underneath. Okay, so yeah, it is good. I mean, the base metal in question maybe needs less roughness. I want to see more of that base metal. Okay, so this makes more sense right now. All right, now I have added in roughness variations on the painted surface, and in addition I already have a mask to chip away from that paint layer to reveal the base metal underneath. So I can similarly add a roughness variation to the base metal underneath. So what I can do here is grab another grayish tone, fractal sum base, for example, go to roughness. Okay, let's shut this off. Okay, and then once again grab the roughness channel to visualize what's going on. So this is too black and white. I want gray tones. So maybe let's get rid of fractal sum base, and this is not a bad idea. Grunge vibe smudge. So let's go to roughness. Okay, this is a better idea. So Okay, not bad, not bad. Let's see what happens with this on top. Okay, so let's go to material. And the variation is very slight, but it is there. And it could be very useful. So as you can see, by playing around with these values, by constantly modifying these material properties, you can really start introducing variation. So far, let's recap. What has happened? This is the recap part. We have created our base metal. In that base metal, we have decided the color. We didn't touch the height. We didn't touch the normals. We only decided on the metallicness, and initially we used a uniform roughness, but then we plugged in a texture, a dynamic texture that could introduce variations to this surface. And since the paint layer is not open right now, you can see the effects of that variation on the surface. Even the surface is really reflective right now. As you can see from the manner of those reflections, the level of shininess on those reflections, you can see that there is considerable amount of surface variation. Okay, take a look at here, for example, and you'll see what I mean. Okay, then what did we do? We introduced a paint layer, and the paint layer was created the same way. It had a uniform color, it had uniform height, which was 0, we didn't touch it. We played around with the roughness, then we did also introduce variations in that roughness with a grunge scratches dirty map, which is again another textures applied from here. You can search for grunge and you will find that. And we played around with its balance and contrast. The metallicness was at 0 because this is paint and it is plasticky in nature, which means it is dielectric. It is industrial grade paint. It is not car paint, for example. So it doesn't have metallic flakes in it, whatever. So it's going to be a non-metallic substance. We set the metallicness at 0 and didn't touch the normals. Then we introduced masks. In this case, a pure white mask. We didn't touch it in any way, but we used a mask editor by adding a generator to it. And from the generator drop-down menu, we selected the mask editor. Inside the mask editor, we have many options to create this mask. And by utilizing our growth space normals, position gradient, thickness, curvature, and ambient occlusion maps, at least some of them, and introducing 2 new textures, once again from the textures drop-down menu or from the asset library, we have started to blend these settings together. And throughout the blending, we are always checking out how we are blending them to each other. Sometimes adding them together, and sometimes subtracting from them in order to add further variations. And the thing you have to remember so far is that these types of controls are very delicate. Usually going to the opposite ends of a spectrum is not going to work. Usually, a lot of the time, you're going to make small adjustments to get really big results. So when you're trying to figure out what is going on and how are you controlling this thing, remember, always remember to alt-click your mask every now and then and check how you are actually masking off this paint layer on top of the base metal or on top of another layer, whatever. Okay, so isolating your mask and trying to see what happens is always a good idea. So you can alt-click on the mask and it will display you the mask. Alternatively, you can go to material if you want to see them all. Okay, so this is what we have done so far. We have introduced ready textures, ready to use textures from the asset library, and the mesh maps, the baked mesh maps of our original object. So what else can we do? We can also, in addition to these, we can also add our own paint. For example, I want to chip away these corners further, because when you search for shipping containers, you will see around the corners, maybe this is not the best image, shipping container corner, let's say, maybe it's going to show up. Let's get rid of the mask. So these castings, as you can see, those castings are easily damaged because that's where these machinery usually connect them. So these are really clean containers, by the way, because they are basically commercials for containers that are for sale. But maybe we can find one. Oh, okay. So here's a really old one. And as you can see, around the corners, see the amount of rust and the paint that has been scratched away or weathered out or throughout years of use. So this is the type of thing maybe we want to replicate, okay? Maybe not this amount of damage, but it is pretty obvious that these corners will receive more damage than the other areas of a shipping container. So you can still go in, grab your mask, right click on it, add paint, and right now this paint is on top. So whatever you paint will be interacting with the mask editor. So I'm going to reduce the hardness and also reduce the size to something acceptable. Okay, and I'm going to start introducing paint, and I also have to, you know, select the color and turn it to black. Okay, so you can, whenever you want, you can start introducing your own paint. This is pretty useful for things that you cannot create with procedural generation. If you want to reveal more than the procedural generation allows you to do, or more than you want the procedural generation to do, because it is going, if you're looking for an area that is going to be chipped away with a lot of paint scratches, but you don't want it for the rest of it, setting up the mask system, the mask editor, in a way that will chip away that amount of paint from everywhere will not work into your advantage. So instead of doing that, just scratch away these surfaces that you will have a hard time painting all the details for, and instead go into a few corners, a few places here and there, and add your own paint. This is one thing that you can do. Okay, so I'm not going to do all of it, obviously, because this is going to take a lot of time. I mean, it's not going to take a lot of time, but I don't want to bore you to death with it. So yeah, this is good enough. This is acceptable. Okay, so the other thing we can do is put another layer in between. So what I'm going to do is create another fill layer, okay, and I'm going to put this between the base metal and the paint. Right now, since that fill layer is completely light gray, it is going to turn itself, it is going to fully occlude the base metal. So I'm going to give it a nice rust color, something like this. Okay, I can even do something crazy and introduce, so let's go with the clouds, and let's change the scale, and let's introduce a lot of disorder as well, and let's increase the contrast. Okay, this is not bad, but what I want to do right now is add a filter, and let's go to filters. Okay, under the filters, I believe we can find a gradient. Okay, now as you can see, we have colors here that we can, this object right now, this base color is created with a grayscale system, and when we lay a gradient on top of it, we can actually utilize it for projecting our new colors into that system, something like this. Now 3 colors is more than good enough. And maybe I can give it a different taste. Something like this. Okay? So this is my fill layer. And it's only going to, as you can see, it is only going to affect the color of this thing. Right now my fill layer, and I'm going to call it rust. Okay? So right now my fill layer also has color, height, roughness, metallic, and normal data, which aside from the color we didn't set up yet. But the gradient in question is only affecting the color channel. If this was to affect roughness, for example, it wouldn't work, first of all, because roughness is in black and white, and we are trying to introduce color to a grayscale map. That's not going to work. This is not going to do anything. Or at least it is going to do something, but it's not the thing that you're looking for. It is going to convert all of these colors into desaturated values, and it's going to apply that. We don't want to do that. We don't want to control any of these channels but the color. So let's go into color, and we have set up our base color. So height, we don't touch it for this tutorial. Roughness, we want roughness all the way to 1, because this is rust after all. And metallicness is all the way down to 0. Okay? So I'm not going to bother with introducing variations in roughness to this. Okay? So what I want to do is create a white mask. Once again, add a generator. Okay? And in that generator, I'm going to select from this list dripping rust. Okay? And that way I can create rust spreading. So when you go look at the image inputs, we also have a position here. We didn't use the position map yet, but what the position map does is, as I've explained it in mesh maps tutorial, this can be utilized to isolate areas of this model in relation to the coordinate system. So right now the position axis of these rust drips, meaning that they are dripping from below. I mean, this thing is, for example, receiving rainwater, and that rainwater is obviously coming from the top. But you can change these values, and then this is going to receive the rust, the leakage of the rust, from the side or from the other side. Okay? So this is what the position channel does. But what I want to do here is introduce the rust. Let me introduce the increase the intensity and reduce the smoothness so the streaks become more apparent. Spreading smoothness. Include the rust contrast, and I can also increase the rust spreading. Okay, so if you, by the way, if you don't like how this looks, I mean, you love the values but you don't know where the rust has landed, you can go around and play with seed. Seed is a random value, and every time you press it, it is going to change. Or you can set up your own seed, and this seed can be utilized as a number. This is the seed value, and this seed value, if you're using, for example, the same rust, the same dripping rust generator in another layer, in another mask, for example, if you make a note of this random seed number and use it there too, you're going to get the same thing. You're going to get the same system. These values will still have to be the same if you want to get the exact same thing, but the pattern in question, okay, it will be the same. So right now I'm in the X channel for whatever reason. I want to be at the Y channel, obviously. So this is too much rust, but we'll see what happens. So base metal and paint. And I'm going to change the paint color to something that will show the rust as well. So something like this. Okay, this is good. Now as you can see, some areas, some of the areas that are showing from underneath are covering these shiny parts. Now I can go into Rust once again, and its mask, at paint, normal mode, grayscale value 1, and I'm going to add this paint. See its effects. This is good, but I can utilize other brushes. Okay, so instead of using that brush, I can basically go in and change my alpha shape. So under the alpha shape, there are many types of brushes. So if I type in just brush, maybe there's something here that I can utilize. So maybe this. Okay. And I'm going to increase its size a bit. And as you can see, I can start introducing my own rust to these areas as well. Okay, so let's turn these on. And as you can see, I have started adding rust between the two layers, both by painting and also using yet another generator. Before we leave off for today, we're going to do one last thing. We're going to add another fill layer. Let's put this on top. And I'm going to just give it a brownish color, a desaturated brownish color, something like this. Okay, it's going to be fully uniformly rough. Base color, this is good enough, fully non-metallic, and I'm going to give it a name, call it dirt. Add another white mask, add another mask generator. Sorry, I have to do this first. Add generator, then select the mask editor. Okay, so I'm not going to bother with the curvature. I'm going to use ambient occlusion. Okay, so right now nothing is happening. If I go to ambient occlusion and play around with its opacity, set it to normal, maybe go to this mask to see what is going on. I want to isolate these areas, dark areas, as much as possible. Let's give it a small amount of blur, not too much. Let's increase the contrast. Okay. Alright, maybe we should add some curvature first by setting this to linear dodge or additive mode, because we want to add it to something. So under the curvature, maybe this time get cavities, only cavities, and I don't want sharp areas. I'm going to do the exact opposite. I don't want huge or big areas, I don't want large areas, but medium I'm fine with. And let's increase the curvature opacity. Let's see what is going on. Maybe just isolate curvature first. Okay, not bad. This is a bit too much, so that's why we don't need this, and we don't need this. Okay, Not bad for a dusty area. Okay. So let me get ambient occlusion into the mix as well. Right. Right now these are the areas that the dust is gathering. Okay. I'm not going to show you the result yet, but we're going to introduce yet another texture. Okay, so I'm happy with the curvature and ambient occlusion, but once again, this is too uniform, and I want to break apart that uniformity. So let's go to textures again, and under the textures, let's go to grunge. So are these the textures? Yes. Let's say grunge, and under grunge, we have a wipe smudge, wipe brushed effects, wipe dusty. So wipe dusty is good enough for me, so I'm going to plug this into texture. Okay. And under the texture layer, once again, I'm going to set this to subtract. And then increase the texture opacity. Not bad, not bad. Okay. And one final thing, I'm going to get grunge wipe grainy. For example, that seems to be like a good one. Yes, texture secondaries here. Let's get it in. Okay. Let's go to texture 2. And I'm going to set this to linear dodge. And I'm going to increase its opacity. And this is a bit too much. So I want to keep the contrast very high. Okay, not that high. I want to keep the contrast, I want to keep the balance in control from here. Okay, this is good. Let's zero these out, but let's increase the scale. And let's increase this scale as well. Maybe let's not play around with the brightness because it is overall increasing the roughness. Okay, so this is good. Let's take this to material. Okay, and to see the effects, we have our dust and dirt channel. Okay, so maybe we can increase the global balance to increase the dirt amount substantially and increase the global blur as well. Maybe this is a bit too much. Let's give it a good 0.05 and decrease the global blur, global balance, sorry. All right. And this is about it. So it's a lot of trial and error, and it takes a lot of time getting used to, especially controlling these amounts of masks. But know that these height values, roughness values, metallic values, normal values, you don't have to control them all the time at the same time. Most of the time, the mask itself, by layering on top of another object, is going to work just fine. You just have to think in terms of, if you're doing photorealistic work, you have to think in terms of how would this object would live its life throughout years, throughout decades even. So what happens to it right after it goes out of the factory? What happens in the factory? What happens when it goes out to the sea? What happens when it sits under the sun for months or for years? what happens when something touches it, something brushes or scratches it, what kind of a dirt it would gather, where it would gather. If you start imagining those things, and if you compare your work to actual images, then as you can see, you will do quite well in terms of replicating or representing reality on a texture scale. So I believe this was a good beginning for creating these types of materials. We're going to take a look at height maps and normal maps, and of course putting graphics and decals on top of these objects in future tutorials. Hopefully you have enjoyed this. I'll see you next time. Keep up the good work.